Thank you all for coming. We're going to try to get started here. Everybody probably knows there's some snacks in the back, so if you get hungry later, feel free to have some of that. This is our second, I'm Libby Gibson, Town Manager. This is our second Coastal Resiliency Plan workshop, and we began this process almost a year ago. Thank you, Nantucket Coastal Conservancy, for pushing us in this direction. We appreciate it. We kicked and screamed at first, but quickly realized that this is the right thing to do, and it's become something that you read about now pretty much daily, I would say. There's something somewhere about climate change, sea level rise, and the impact it's having on communities all over the world. So we're going to take you through, we have hired a firm here, Malone & McBroom, to help us develop a coastal resiliency plan. It's going to incorporate probably some other plans over time, a dredge plan and our hazard mitigation plan. Both of which, hazard mitigation is in the process of being updated, dredge is in the process of being developed. And the idea here is to start looking at areas around the island that are vulnerable to sea level rise and climate change, and identify ways in which we're going to address that. So Dave here and Noah are going to take us through some exercises and give an overview, and any questions, I think, just let us know. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to start us out. I'm David Murphy from Malone & McBroom. This is Noah Slovin from the same firm. And I'm just going to take a moment to describe how the evening will go. I see some familiar faces from the May meeting, so you already know the format. But we'll have about 45 minutes where we present some information to you, and we're going to do some interactive voting in that first 45 minutes. So I hope you all took one of those little clickers, looks like a garage door opener, from the front table. If you don't have one, I can run back and get one, or Noah can run back and get one for you. But we'll do some voting during the first part of the night, the first hour, 45 minutes. And then after that, we're going to shut this down, and we'll go back and we'll do some voting with dots on the boards, different kinds of questions. We've also got some postcards to fill out. So we have a lot of different ways to get your feedback tonight, by voting, with dots, and then writing on postcards. So we want to remember to do all of that. And then at the very end, we'll go around the room, and Noah and I will take turns going through each board and talking about what people's votes look like, the profile of the voting on each board. Okay, so we're going to step through a presentation first, talk about risk concepts. We'll go through some risk questions, that's the voting. Resilience concepts, then some resilience questions, and they're going to be opinion questions. So if you didn't do your homework, it's all right. It's opinion questions. We'll have one slide where we talk about the results of the previous meeting, and we wanted to put that kind of at the end of the presentation, so you can be surprised after you've done your own voting. And then we'll just kind of wrap up the presentation part of this with what the next steps are. So here's a little bit of an overview for you, first of all. So what is resilience? This is like the new sustainability, right? Every few years is a new buzzword. This is the buzzword right now, resilience. I find that it's always helpful to define it. When I'm reading resilience plans, there's never a definition. I always wonder why that is. There's really four facets of resilience. You have to resist the shock that's coming, the storm that's coming, or sea level rise. You need to absorb it as well. You have to be able to recover from it. And then the really important part of resilience, that fourth facet, adapt, so that in the future, you don't suffer the same loss that you suffered maybe in the event that occurs right now. So resilience can include traditional hazard mitigation actions that reduce financial losses, but it also incorporates recovery. Recovery is an important part of it, and it addresses long-term adaptation to changing conditions. So you really have to have all those things in your definition of resilience. So what's a climate resilience plan? Which is a little bit of what we're doing as a climate resilience plan. It considers all impacts of climate change. So it typically includes an assessment of what's vulnerable, what's at risk. Sometimes these plans, climate resilience plans, talk about ways to reduce carbon emissions. A lot of towns incorporate that into their climate resilience plan. Noah, where you live, I think they're incorporating in Somerville or Cambridge? Somerville, you're on the line. Sometimes climate resilience plans address other aspects of sustainability, like recycling, et cetera. In a coastal community, a climate change resilience plan is often similar to a coastal resilience plan, simply by virtue of the community being a coastal community. And then here, Nantucket, the coastal resilience plan can be a climate resilience plan by incorporating non-coastal climate-related risks. I feel kind of silly saying that because what in Nantucket is not coastal? It's kind of hard to find an area that doesn't have some kind of coastal influence. So switching over to what is a coastal resilience plan, it's kind of the same thing, but it kind of doesn't really address the carbon emissions and sustainability issues that are in a climate resilience plan. It typically is a little bit more spatial in nature. It's talking about what happens in certain areas. So it can be very comprehensive, community-wide, cross-sector. So it's looking at health and safety, infrastructure, tourism, economic indicators. It's very interdisciplinary. So we want to know how Public Works is dealing with something versus the planning department. It's very multi-hazard, but there are coastal hazards. So erosion, shoreline change, inundation, and wind events. It does consider future conditions, changing climate, and then it focuses on resilience. And again, there's those 4 components right there that prepare, respond, adapt, recover. And a coastal resilience plan, hopefully, will strengthen positions for funding in the future going forward. So possible outcomes, which are the same as kind of what we just went through, but this is the flip side. It could be a roadmap for community decision making. It could propose minimum design criteria considerations. So Nantucket's Coastal Resilience Plan isn't going to say every seawall in the downtown area must be at elevation 13 feet. It's going to say every seawall must be designed in accordance with X, Y, and Z. So we're not here to tell you the numbers. We're kind of here to help you come up with the thought process behind kind of how to go forward. The plan could prioritize areas to address, short-term versus long-term, maybe strategies to maintain services and a tax base. It's going to be consensus-based, identify next steps for planning or design, and then again, like I said in the last slide, positioning for funding is very important. So this is the scope of services kind of that we're stepping through as the consultant. We've already completed the first few rows. We reviewed existing capabilities. We've done some data collection. We've looked at vulnerabilities and risks. Right now, we're in the public workshops. We had one in May. We're having one today. We'll go back to our desk, kind of review resilience options, put together a resilience framework. We'll kind of have a draft initial plan with an implementation framework in it. And then we're going to kind of put a hold on this one scope of services right here temporarily, and I'll tell you why that is. So the town has been fortunate to receive a grant from the state of Massachusetts in the MVP grant program, Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness. It's a great acronym, grant program. And this is a grant that's not quite in hand yet, but it'll be starting up sometime later part of the summer. And this is a planning process that the state is promoting for not just coastal, but climate resilience planning in general. Obviously, you can see a lot of these communities are not coastal in Massachusetts. The blue and kind of lavender colors in the map are the communities that were in the program last year. If I advance one slide, you can see many more are in the program this year with grants that have been allocated, and town of Nantucket as well is looking forward to using this grant. And then what will happen is we'll kind of go back to our ladder, our rungs of our scope, and we're going to add to that by having some stakeholder-driven planning. And so that'll happen, see the acronym to the right kind of shows what's part of the MVP program. So the stakeholder, getting them all together. There'll be a little bit more data collection that we kind of do off to the side. There'll be a workshop or 2 workshops. It'll be a long day, folks. It'll be either 8 hours or 4 hours, 2 separate 4-hour days for these stakeholders to come together and do this planning. There'll be a risk assessment report, which has a certain kind of format that the state requires. And then we'll go back to our coastal resilience framework and add to the plan and revisit what we said in our implementation to make sure that we're incorporating outcomes of this planning process. It's not a public process per se. There is a report out to the public at the end, but the stakeholders are typically made of members of the public who are part of organizations. So this is something that's coming up. We're not going to spend much more time talking about it tonight, but we can talk about it maybe afterwards in the Q&A. So what about the hazard mitigation plan Libby mentioned? So the previous edition was adopted in 2007. The update is currently going on right now. It recognizes these things. We didn't leave anything out, but hazard mitigation plans do have limitations. They're very highly prescribed. You must do it the way FEMA says to do it. There's a very short time frame, what you're going to do in the next 5 years only, and it includes all natural hazards. We've got a chapter on wildfires. We've got a chapter on tornadoes, et cetera. But we're going to make sure it integrates well with the Coastal Resilience Plan and the MVP process so that they all kind of dovetail. We're going to go through some risk concepts. So risk, another definition, I defined resilience earlier. Risk is kind of very mathematical to me. It's vulnerability and frequency together. So if something is not vulnerable, it's not going to have a huge risk to a storm occurring. Or if something is a little bit vulnerable, but the storm happens very frequently or the event happens very frequently, that also can drive up the risk. So it's got two parts. And there I kind of just said what these things are. Vulnerable is how susceptible something is to damage or loss. Frequency is how often does the event happen. So we can control which one. Just shout out. What vulnerability, right? We're not so good at controlling frequency yet. Maybe someday. I shudder to think, but maybe that's coming someday. So the risks that we're talking about are flooding, erosion, wind, temperature, extremes, precipitation, the rain bombs that we've been experiencing, that's the new terminology. Droughts, the flashy droughts. Rain bombs, flashy droughts are these terms that you've heard or you've read. And sea level rise. And those things can lead to kind of secondary impacts, especially in a coastal community, isolation, fragmentation of areas, response. You can't get to some people, they can't get to you, for example. I want to talk about sea level rise momentarily and go way, way, way back to my favorite book from when I was a child, which is this book by the USGS about how Cape Cod and the islands were formed. I was that dorky as a child, still am. So this shows the glacial ice and the terminal moraines right here. And you've probably seen graphics like this in the past. So Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket, where there's glacial till and Elwash that together have formed those two islands. The ice retreated, and then there was another moraine that was through the mid-cape, really, mostly, not the outer. And then after the ice melted further, sea level rise started to occur. This was the initial position of the shoreline when ice first started to retreat. It's pretty far out here. This is all dry land. So here's Nantucket. It was not an island. It was just a hilly part of this terrain. This is a graphic that I grabbed from someone's report on the submerged forest that was found in Nantucket Sound. This is showing another position of the shoreline about 10,000 years before present. So again, Nantucket, not an island, kind of a peninsula in this lobe out here, but this was all dry land. And of course, this is the position of the shoreline today. So we've been dealing with sea level rise for 12,000 years, and it has continued, although it has plateaued in the past couple thousand years. And we believe that maybe we have pushed past that plateau and it is starting to rise again. But it's certainly something that the Earth has always had going on. Sea level has changed over time. Here's the last 50 years, and this is actual measured water level data in Nantucket Harbor. So you can kind of see what the trend has been. It's been about 1 foot in the past 100 years, if we take this 50 years and double it into 100 years. So, risks are very closely connected when it comes to sea level rise. The causes and effects of what's happening, what we observe, are very interrelated. Erosion is worsened by sea level rise. Flooding is worsened by sea level rise because your base level is rising, so the flood that occurs on top of that is also rising. And then floods and erosion together cause shoreline change. So it's a very complex relationship that occurs. The state of Massachusetts has mapped shorelines and how they've changed all throughout the coastal part of the state. This is data that anybody can get and throw into their geographic information system program. So this kind of shows, the arrows show where there's been erosion, and then the blue arrows show where there's been some accretion. And again, this is based on the state's mapping. They use aerial photographs going way back to produce this geographic information system data set. And we can get that and we can put it on our computers and look at it. So this is very factual. It's based on aerial photographs. At the same time that we're dealing with erosion and accretion, FEMA's out there doing what it does best, which is mapping flooding. And FEMA does this, of course, for the town to be part of the National Flood Insurance Program and for people to buy flood insurance should they need it. So the FEMA mapping for the island shows different base flood elevations. That's a 100-year flood. And I'll just, there's more of this red than anything else. That's the VE9 zone. So the base flood elevation, the 100-year flood is supposedly 9 feet above sea level where it's red, 10 feet where it's kind of this orange color. So, again, you can see how FEMA has done what they do well, which is map out the flood risk. Sure. Yes.
Labels, or are they like?
No, so that's a good question. So the AE zones and the VE zones are different in that the V stands for velocity. So if there's high wave damage that could occur, it's mapped as a VE zone, and V is simply velocity. And then A is just what they use for all their flood zones nationwide. A just means the flood zone. And the E means that they have an elevation assigned to it. So if there's no E, like here in the south of Milestone Road, they've mapped a flood zone, but they haven't given it an elevation. They simply haven't done that level of analysis to know what the elevation of the flood could be. So a good question, thank you. Now I'm going to take a break, and you're up.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to walk through. Dave covered a lot of the hazards as they exist currently, and I'm going to walk through some of what we're expecting will change about these hazards in the future. As we kind of touched on earlier, coastal hazards and climate-related hazards are numerous. So accelerated sea level rise, more intense and frequent storms, increased precipitation overall. So the difference between that is increased precipitation, we're talking about over the course of a year, just a larger quantity of precipitation over the whole year. And in addition to that, or as part of that, a lot more of that rain and precipitation will be happening during individual storms. So the storms will be stronger and more intense. More severe droughts, which kind of goes with the more intense precipitation, both sides of that coin, warming temperatures, and then a variety of other changes that are also related. Accelerated erosion, that's not a climate change phenomenon in of itself, but because of sea level rise and the more intense storms, that'll go along with that. Insect and tick-borne illnesses, changing seasonal patterns, impacts on agriculture, changing habitats, evolving fisheries, all sorts of fun things to look forward to. I'm going to touch on some of these, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if people have questions and we want to go back to these later, we definitely can. So there are many different projections that come out over time. Each time kind of new science has honed the projections to get a little bit more detail and specific about that. So most recently, the NOAA and USGS together in 2017 have come up with this new booklet looking at sea level rise. Actually, that book was just a small summary. There's a lot more data behind it. Globally, what sea level rise is expected to be, and importantly, regionally around the US. Different places, sea level is rising relative to land surface at different rates. So this new 2017 model shows the East Coast and what expectations are going to be relative to some of the previous models. They're showing an increase in the upper bound, so sea level, the maximum amount that sea level might rise is higher than it was before, and also the lowest amount that they expect sea level to rise is higher than it was before. So this graph down here is showing the range. The top one is kind of the most extreme example of what could possibly happen. That's the worst case scenario. And importantly, this bottom one, this darkest color here, that's vertical land movement. That's not even the minimum. That's the minimum if sea level stopped completely right now. So really what we're expecting is somewhere in this mid-range. So 2 to 10 feet per century. And the NOAA website, you can go look at their sea level rise projections, and they've made it very user-friendly so that you can also kind of imagine what that will look like. So this photo on the right, which I assume many people recognize, this is the Whaling Museum downtown. This is from NOAA's website, so showing the projected sea level rise. And for that, you can see, okay, about 6 feet by the end of the century, which is kind of a midpoint of that range, what is reasonable to expect. And this image is from the website. They model what the sea level rise would look like at this site.
So we did not make that graphic. That's out there in the world.
Importantly, we did not make that graphic. Noah made that graphic. Not me, Noah. I'm Noah. Noah. Confusing. So we can look at what these different sea level rise scenarios will look like on Nantucket. from however many feet up this is. It doesn't look like that much, but we'll click through. If we're looking at a high sea level rise scenario, so that's right back, that's like this red one. Looking at that high scenario, right now this is what the island looks like. The white and the blue is the water. And when we go to the 2080s, we can see some fairly significant increases in the inland extent of where we would expect high tide to reach. And one important thing to note is that a lot of these lakes we would expect to be breached under the way that the land currently looks by those high tides. So just some areas that we would be looking at. Downtown Red Point, Harborside communities, and Nantucket Harbor are some of the most hit by sea level rise and inundation from sea level rise. There are some places where we would expect isolation as roads are cut off, and then some natural habitats that will be impacted by the rising seas and the salt water coming into what used to be freshwater habitats.
Does that include erosion?
This does not include erosion. Great question, though. This is erosion. So erosion, there are a few different ways that we can look at that. This is the Massachusetts Shoreline Change browser. This is the Office of Coastal Zone Management and I want to say the Army Corps. I'm forgetting a little bit right now, but they've looked at satellite photos and maps and aerial photography to look at where the shoreline has existed over time and mapped short-term and long-term shoreline change rates based on that. So what this is showing is different years or different decades where the shoreline was. So the red is 1844 to 1897. That's based on different photos that they looked at or maps that they looked at. Going through time to most recently 2007, 2009, that's just the solid black line where the shoreline was. From that, they can see what the shoreline change rates are, and I've kind of marked some general trends with these arrows. So large-scale erosion in the southwest part of the island, erosion of the south, erosion in the northeast. It's kind of a little bit back and forth, definitely an active area in Sconset, but not a big long-term erosion pattern. And then there are some places where you also see accretion, where the land has been moving out into the water. So we actually, it's a little bit hard to see here, but we looked at that and kind of projected into the future for the next 50 years, if the long-term erosion rates continue, if the short-term erosion rates is somewhere in between. So this is just kind of a set of different possible futures that we just kind of a coarse model looked at. It's, again, hard to see from here, but the same patterns, maybe a little bit of build-out down here, and then just large amounts of inland movement and some other changes around the island. Importantly, this is not a model that's taking into account the physics of erosion. This is just based on what the historical trends are. Those historical trends change based on a variety of factors, including when humans try to prevent erosion. That has an effect. That's not modeled here. And also sea level rise that will accelerate erosion is not modeled here. There is other work being, but sea level rise will change the rate of erosion. There is some other work being done on that. So FEMA is, as part of their risk map hazard risk improvement program, they are specifically going to be looking at Nantucket and erosion rates. The Technical Mapping Advisory Council has recommended that FEMA look at more information about future conditions that include the impacts of sea level rise on erosion and future erosion rates. So there will be more information about that coming out in the future. So other impacts from climate change from that long list before, other than sea level rise and erosion, the state of Massachusetts is developing, and it has been developing, and actually a lot of those has completed development on many different projections for what the future will look like. That's all available through the Massachusetts climate website. I think it's resilientma.org now. I'm not 100% sure. There's actually two. There's one .org and one .gov. They've kind of been working through that. But they have maps and data products on what the future will look like across the state. It's not super high detail. They have it by county, I believe, is the closest. So luckily Nantucket is its own county, so we get a fairly good view of what that will be. These images are not going to be super helpful because of the relatively low resolution of that. But the basic takeaways are, when you look at more intense storms, with the states looking at more intense storms, they're expecting more intense storms on Nantucket. There will be more days with large rain events on them, or large precipitation events. That's going to increase in the future. Overall precipitation is going to increase. This is a lighter color, so that's not going to be as significant a impact on Nantucket. And then again, 2070s, you can see not a huge change. And I can go back to these if you want to really dive into the details, but my point here is just kind of a general overview. What are we expecting? More precipitation, more intense storms, slightly more precipitation, many more dry days. That's going to be, by 2050s, 19.8 to 20.95 days in a row without rain. And by the 2070s, 19.8 to 21.2 days in a row without rain. So, somewhat an extension of the expected droughts that we'll be looking at. And then temperatures will increase 4 degrees by 2050s and 5.5 degrees by the 2070s.
All right.
Okay.
So let's have a little bit of a discussion about how the voting is going to work. We're going to go through a series of questions. And we're going to start with a question that doesn't have a lot of consequence, so that if something goes wrong, we can correct ourselves and figure out how to do it when the real questions begin. So you'll see what that question is in a moment. But there's going to be 10 seconds, on each slide to vote, and you have 5 choices on your clicker. One more time, anybody not have a clicker? Everyone's got one, right? There's no actual clicking sound, so don't be concerned. Whatever is the last button you press in that 10 seconds, that's your vote. So you can change your vote. If you press number 1 and then 5 seconds later you decide you want to press number 2, that's okay, but as soon as 10 seconds hits, whatever last button you hit is your vote. We're not voting for president. There's not going to be any right or wrong here, so don't get too concerned about it. And again, we're going to start with a kind of a fun icebreaker question. In Connecticut, when we do this, icebreaker question is always a Red Sox or Yankees kind of question, but we're not doing that question here. Instead, we're going to ask you if you had to live in Martha's Vineyard. So you're going to pick, and we know there's not 6 buttons, so just do your best on this one. And I think if we advance, it'll start going, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So everyone can start to choose an answer right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're not going to choose Edgerton because there's no 6. All right, everyone's voted? I think it's been about 10 seconds.
Actually, I don't understand the question.
If you had to live on this island,
Yeah.
which area would you choose?
And the numbers relate to
Just as the towns, so,
the towns?
yeah.
So we've got 5 buttons and 6
Right,
possibilities.
right. This question is at least sort of the fun, inconsequential one, but you have to pick. You can't pick 6. So
It's a wasteland. No, it's
you can't pick 6. All right. So when you go forward, all right. So everybody picked. 17% of you picked Aquinnah. So you see how this works, right? So what's the next town over? Chilmark. So a third of you picked that town, and then they go from west to east. So you get the idea. Nobody could choose Edgerton and nobody wanted. 5 was
Oh, plus.
Oak Bluffs. You're all hating on Oak Bluffs. Okay. So everyone feels comfortable with the clicker? All right. So we're going to go through and now do some real questions. So, have you seen flooding become more frequent? And these are opinion questions and what you've observed. So, yes, definitely. Yes, probably. You're unsure. Probably not. Definitely not. So again, flooding, coastal or inland. So we're not worried about so much the cause right here, just flooding.
Can we start?
Yes. And where's the timer? We can just, you know, I can do. No, I'll do 10 seconds on this each time. We had a little timer on the screen in the May meeting, and we're not sure where the timer is, but that's all right. Okay, so I'm going to advance to everyone's done voting, right? Okay. All right. So 84% of you say yes, definitely. Okay, nobody said definitely not. Great. And these answers are recorded in the program, so we don't have to scramble to write them down. We can pull this off later. Okay, have you seen erosion accelerate? So again, it's definitely, probably, unsure, probably not, definitely not, and we'll start voting right now. Go ahead. It's what do you think? What have you seen? Okay, that's time. All right, so similar to the flooding. Actually, there's even more people that said yes than unsure. In this case, nobody said unsure. Okay? Have you seen precipitation become more intense? So, for example, maybe you live on a paved road, and so you see more times that the road has water in it for a longer period of time, that sort of thing. And we'll go ahead and start right now. Go ahead and vote.
Also, snow counts as precipitation.
Thanks for complicating that further. Okay. All right, well, so that's interesting. We do have, nobody's unsure, but we've got some people who are firmly in the probably not camp. And that tells me a lot, because there are some towns, especially in more hilly areas that are not coastal, that definitely are falling more in the yes category. So we've got some digging to do here to see what's going on. Okay, droughts. Question about droughts. Let's go ahead and vote now. Same answers. Yes, yes, unsure, no, no. Okay. Did that one work right?
No.
Okay, that's a little bit strange. Let's see if we can. Yeah, we can do it again. All right. That's very bizarre. All right, go ahead and. No?
No?
I've never seen that happen.
I think you can go now.
Okay. All right, go ahead and vote now. This is droughts. And whatever glitch just happened, let's hope it doesn't happen again. Everyone's voted for droughts? Okay. Did anybody say definitely not on droughts?
I said yes, probably.
What is with the droughts?
Election meddling.
This didn't happen in May, and I can't think.
Blame it on the Russians.
I can't think of a reason why one would not work. Let's go on to the next hazard.
Okay.
All right. No.
Yeah. Let me. about it right now.
Okay, just let's do wind events. All right, have you seen wind events become more frequent or severe? Okay, go ahead and start voting. Okay, everyone's voted?
I said definitely not.
Yeah, would it help to restart the computer and run through it again?
There's
See if that
a few
makes
of us
sense.
just have us raise our hands.
Well,
Yeah, just
We're not gonna look at
yeah, well, this is supposed to be fun and exciting and work.
it.
And it did work last time.
We can do a little testing.
Is it, I think this is, back off, let's see if there's one more of these. We do have another set of questions about resilience. Well, this is what we're gonna do while he's checking this out. I'm gonna pass out these postcards because we actually didn't pass these out in the last meeting. These are gonna be filled out in the second half, but I'll talk about them as we're kind of going around. And of course, if you need a restroom break, now is not a bad time. So there are 4 postcards. And again, please don't fill them out right now because we're gonna, in the next few minutes, we're gonna talk about what these are. And they are 4 different kinds of options for adapting to coastal hazards and climate change. And we're gonna, again, we'll define these: accommodation, retreat, protection, and accommodation followed by retreat. We're gonna get these passed out, because in the end we forgot about them, we're not gonna forget, but again, we're not gonna fill them out yet, okay?
Would you remember pens?
Well, the pens are all hung in the back, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna, hang on. So I'm gonna pass, there's 4 different cards, they're not collated, so we're gonna pass one bunch around. The next one will go around a few seconds later, and we will get this side. This bunch, trying to have them not commingle. So in the end, you'll have 4 different cards. If you want to wait, when we do the dot voting in the next hour, there's pens all in the back, and we fill them out then. How you doing up there?
I mean, I'm not sure what the problem was.
Why don't we go back in on drafts?
Okay.
Or, you know what we'll do is, let's start back in at the first voting slide. Let me know when I can bring some to the side over there. We know the silt house is gone. We- Thank you all for bearing with us as we try to make the voting work.
I know the problem.
You do?
Only one transceiver is.
What is it?
It's only getting one transceiver.
How would that have started?
Oh no, this is the transceiver. Those are all the things. Never mind, they're right.
Okay, so we're gonna start this over again. They're using up to fire me. Yeah, then we'll make sure we get these all. I don't think we has retreat. Right. Yeah. Let's send the retreat down this aisle. Here we go. You haven't had any yet, have you?
No cards.
Okay, this side still needs them too.
Okay. Okay, this is what we can do.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I gave you 10.
We'll get it cut up. Just everyone hold for 1 second, please.
okay, on the back of everyone's transceiver, keypad, there should be an address number. So that's your number, and if you click your keypad, it'll show up with a number. So I just clicked 2 and 2 lit up. So yeah, everyone try to click 1 or try to click through, and if they seem broken, raise your hand. Maybe we can give you a new.
Well, they'll have no way of knowing.
No, because it's their number. So
Yes, got it. No, it works. You've got the right number.
Yeah. We'll get it squared away.
does anybody not understand what is going on?
And it changed also.
We'll get the cards caught up. Don't worry about them right now, guys. Does everybody have a chance to find your number? We're just gonna.
So is anybody noticing their their keypad not working? We'll give you a new one. Sorry?
25 that are.
Yeah. Well, is anybody clicking there and it's not showing up?
Well, they wouldn't. There's too many.
Yeah, so you can see your number.
Also click through the numbers and all the numbers work.
Okay, so let's try it again. I don't know. Should be
All right.
working. Okay, let's try this again.
Okay.
Sign up. Okay.
No, this is the resilience questions. We need the risk questions.
Sorry, my bad.
This was so fun in May. I know nobody's believing me at this point.
Okay, here we go.
People were laughing and
Okay.
singing.
Sometimes technology is not your friend.
No, I know. Okay, so here we go with the flooding question again. All right, everyone vote. Go ahead and just point in this general area, if you don't mind. I know you are anyway, but, okay,
Just make sure you don't accidentally press another button after.
all right. Okay. No. Okay,
Let's just raise our hands. I know.
We can just write it down
yeah.
We have to accommodate.
and adapt it.
These are good jokes. I am not a happy person, but they're good jokes. All right, so who's in the yes definitely? Okay, so do high hands.
Blind voting.
Hey, we can do this at town meeting, you know?
Okay. All right, then the yes probably. That's 2, I think. Okay. Unsure. So now everyone's shy. Probably not. Definitely not. Okay. Go ahead, next one. Can you advance to the next? All right, erosion accelerating. Number 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. Okay. Yes, probably. People are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Unsure. Okay. Probably not. Definitely not. Okay. Next question. Is it not advancing?
It's something that the projector doesn't know which thing is going on. It's having some trouble with this.
Precipitation more intense. Okay. Yes, definitely. Okay, yes, probably. Okay. Unsure about the precipitation? I think that makes some sense. Okay. And then probably not. It can be more intense. So more intense means more in a shorter amount of time. Okay, nobody. And then definitely not. Okay. Next question. Droughts. Because this is where we went. This is where it fell apart last time on droughts. So more frequent or severe. So not both frequent and severe, but just one or the other. Yes, definitely. Okay. Yes, probably. Okay. Unsure. Okay. Probably not. And definitely not. It's hard to be definite about droughts. All right. Have you seen wind events become more frequent or severe? Yes, definitely. Yes, probably. Okay, unsure. And then probably not. And then definitely not. Okay, next question. What do you think is the most urgent climate-related challenge? So it's hard to pick one, I know. So, yes. It's a really good question, not globally. So more rapidly rising seas is the first question. And if someone has trouble seeing, I can read them all.
Are you supposed to pick one of these?
One of these,
Okay.
the most urgent.
Most urgent.
It doesn't mean we're only going to care about one.
Right, no, I got that, I just wanted to go.
So,
Like Title flooding? The first one? Would you include tides with that?
yeah, I would. Okay, so number one. Okay. Number two, which is more frequent or intense storms. We're not defining the kind of storm. Okay. All right. More frequent severe droughts. Not surprised, that's not everyone's most urgent. Extreme temperatures. Okay. Insect and tick-borne illnesses. Interesting, okay. And then changing seasonal patterns and how tourism can be affected by that. So longer winters, shorter winters, longer summers, etc. I just watched Snowpiercer last night. Have you ever seen it? So probably, I don't know if you have, but it's all about a frozen planet, so it's on my mind. Okay. So now we're going to go through some resilience concepts. No, is this me or you?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's,
No, you do the questions. That's right. So let's go back to our equation, and we're going to try to make up from some lost time because we did lose a little bit. Remember the two parts of this, vulnerability and frequency. So we can draw a little matrix as we do the analysis, and something that is very highly vulnerable and very frequent would fall into this red box in the upper right hand. So high vulnerability, high frequency, high risk. Low vulnerability, low frequency, low risk. So we can kind of put things into these categories and kind of assess where they kind of shake out. So daily high tide is something that's very frequent. Major storms is less frequent. So you can kind of attach events to these rows and these columns. Here's another way to do it. Specific sites at risk, so just one little area. The whole neighborhood is affected or the entire island, so low, medium, high. And so then what our job to do in the hazard mitigation plan to a lesser extent, but really in the coastal resilience plan, is to look at bluff erosion, beach erosion, erosion of specific receptors like the wastewater treatment ponds, bridges undermining. Where these really all fit in is what we need to try to do as we kind of work through this process. So we're not doing this right now. I'm just kind of letting you know what we're going to be looking at. So we talk about towns being at a crossroads when it comes to resilience and risk. And thinking back to that equation, if we don't really try to address the vulnerability of a house or a sewer line, and it's increasing, the vulnerability is increasing over time because we're not repairing it, we're not moving it, the risk will increase very strongly because the frequency of events is increasing over time due to climate change, we believe. If we kind of hold on to something, repair it, keep the vulnerability the same, the risk will still increase because the frequency is changing. Now here's where it gets interesting. If we start to reduce the vulnerability of a house by elevating it, or by putting breakaway walls in underneath the house, or if we harden a sewer main so it doesn't fail, if we really dive down these vulnerabilities, that's where we can start to reduce risk, and that's what resilience is, in addition to those 4 things that we defined earlier, the 4 components of resilience. These are just some areas that we'll be looking at in the coming months as we work through the planning process. Inundation is something that Brant Point deals with, downtown deals with. You saw this in January and February. Nantucket's dealing with it. Erosion, we know where the hot spots are. The South Shore certainly is seeing some of the extreme rates on the island. Unstable banks and maybe a lesser degree of erosion is a problem in parts of Sconset, but not all of it right now. And then other changes, shoreline change, breaches of where some of the ponds are. These are other things that will be expected to change sort of in the future. Rates will change, and we'll be looking at those things as well. Some areas that are at risk of isolation. Certainly if you live at the tip of Brant Point and there's a flood, you're isolated. So that's kind of where we put these stars, areas that are cut off by high water. There are 3 general types of adaptation, and now we're getting back to these cards that I passed out. So, and these are pretty old, these 3 categories. If you go back to the 1990s, we were talking about them. Retreat, which means stepping back from the shoreline, getting out of the way of erosion and flooding. So no protection in this case. You just kind of get out of vulnerable areas. And this is a part of Codfish Park that surely you've been to where there used to be some structures. Accommodation is kind of living with the threat, living with high water, living with erosion. And the stilt house was kind of a good example of accommodation for a while. Flooding could occur underneath it. Dunes could shift underneath it. But what we've kind of found is that over the long term, accommodation doesn't always work out. In the end, you kind of have to make a decision, retreat or protect. So it comes into a time frame aspect. How long can you accommodate for? In an area like Brant Point, you can accommodate for a very, very long time. You can elevate a house and it can flood 400 times in the next 50 years, and that's kind of a combination that kind of works. And then protection, of course, is stopping the flooding, stopping the water, stopping the erosion. So, yeah.
You can keep raising the house so it doesn't flood, but if you don't have any land, dry land under it,
Yes. Yeah.
at some point, it's going to be high enough.
That's right. Accommodation doesn't work forever. Mhm. So subsequent to the 1990s, our federal agencies have told us there's a lot of other kinds of categories of adaptation. They've talked about transportation options, shoreline management, living shorelines are a big deal right now, bioengineered banks, what does that really mean? How bioengineered is something? Is it hard protection? Is it soft protection? Of course, our traditional friends from a long time ago, seawalls, bulkheads, revetments, which we used to build 100 years ago. Elevating buildings, things that can help us decide how to move back buildings, like rolling easements, and then regulations, development limits, building standards, building codes, and then of course we can't forget emergency management, making sure that we have shelters that people can get to, making sure public works can get to certain areas to respond after disasters. What's really interesting, I think one of the most interesting things about planning for the future is it's very scale dependent. You can do something that's kind of a regional scale or maybe national scale if you're in the Netherlands, or you can do something that's very site specific that just affects one property. And I think what we're going to find here on Nantucket is that we're kind of in this middle range. You know, we're not going to have something that goes around the whole island like a barrier. We lost a house in Wellfleet, my family, a couple years ago. I remember when I was born, my mom used to say, maybe someday there'll be a bubble over all of Cape Cod. Well, that never happened, but that would have been regional scale. Instead, we learned to live with erosion and eventually had to make some hard choices about it. But we're going to do that for Manhattan, right? That's an area that we can't really afford to lose. So now we've got some resilience questions. Should we even see if they work? Or should we just do hands? Okay. So we'll do this with hands again. All right, so which of the following needs to be addressed first? And again, these are opinion questions. So I'll just read through them before you guys choose. So isolation from the mainland, inundation of private properties and businesses, erosion of private properties and businesses, fragmentation that can occur during floods, damage to utility infrastructure, and damage to beaches and natural resources. So all of these will be something that we look at in the planning process, but we're kind of asking, what would you start with? So, number one, and by isolation from the mainland, we know you're an island. We mean like the steam, we mean the steamship can't get back and forth, and Highland can't get back and forth, and you don't have power, and you're out of supplies. So number one. Okay, read. 4. Okay. So inundation means water is on the property, water's in the building, water's in the business. So what happened this January and February? Okay. Erosion of private properties or businesses. So again, this is just what we would choose to deal with first. No one's choosing erosion? Okay. So fragmentation, so isolation for maybe, so for example, people in Nantucket can't get out. There's stuff there they can't get in. If you're across Millie's Bridge, that sort of thing. One for number 4, okay. Damage to utilities and infrastructure. And we saw this with the sewer line. Okay. And then damage to beaches and natural resources. We're not defining damage for you right now. You can decide whatever that is in your own. Okay. Number 2. Yeah, never. So and we're gonna fill out the cards, but before that, kind of as a practice, what do you think should be Nantucket's primary approach to building resilience? So retreating from at-risk areas, accommodating hazards, protecting at-risk areas, some combination, or I don't know yet, which is a perfectly valid answer. And this planning process is going to look at all of these options, not only just one of them, regardless of what you say tonight. So who votes for retreat as the primary?
Now, what you're saying in terms of retreating is this is public policy, you'll have to retreat. It's not that I can decide to retreat. It's that I
It's a
will be
policy
required to.
Well, it's a policy document, so it'd be something that would help commissions, agencies going forward make decisions in certain areas. But it wouldn't necessarily be island-wide. It may be that retreat is a policy in one area but not another.
So does the last comment take you to number 4?
Yes.
Is that effect?
Yeah, some combination, right? And again, the question is, should it be the primary approach? So although we don't mean everywhere, we mean kind of the main approach island-wide. Again, it's opinion question, so you can kind of read any way you want into it.
Aren't 4 and 5 gonna say?
Well, I don't know about that. I think number 5 is for someone who kind of wants to take some time over the next few months thinking about it, whereas number 4 is for people who are kind of have a good sense of it now. So number 1, votes for number 1. And this is the kind of question that the clickers would really be nice, because you're not raising your hand. So if you're shy, tell us afterwards. So number 2 is accommodate. Any votes for accommodate? Number 3 is protecting at-risk areas. Some combination. I think you're all brilliant. That's no, keep your hands up. I have to count. Okay. And then if you don't know yet, that's perfectly fine. Thank you. Right? He's great. He doesn't know yet, and that's the best answer. All right, so now we're just going to practice with one area, and we're going to get done with this fiasco and move on to the boards with the dots now in a minute. So how important is Millie's Bridge? If damaged, the impact on the community would be we're not quantifying these, low, moderate, medium, high, extreme.
We do the question we had last time. By the community, we mean the Nantucket as an island.
Yeah.
Define damage, impassable,
We're trying to not do that here. We want this to be,
so what's damage?
so maybe level of service is decreased for a couple days. People have to not use it for a couple days, but it can come back after that. It's meant to be not a specific kind of damage. And again, this is an exercise in the planning process. So the impact on the community, the whole town. How about the low? Anyone voting for low?
Couple days.
Okay. Moderate? Okay. Medium, which is kind of the same, but a little bit more. All right, high? Okay. And extreme? Okay. And then this is a different kind of question for the bridge. How frequently is it exposed to this risk? And so these are a little bit quantified for you, even though the last one wasn't. So rarely, once or twice over 50 years, occasionally, once a decade, regularly, once a year, frequently, multiple times a year, and constantly, just, that's constant.
Now, not moving.
Right, this is now. So the votes for number 1, rarely exposed to risk. Okay. Number 2, occasionally. Okay. Regularly. I'm sorry. Frequently. Frequently, multiple times a year. Okay. And then constantly, which I would hope that nobody would pick constantly, or else we're in trouble. Okay. And so this links back to that matrix that we looked at. So it's our job to go back and think about those kinds of questions for other assets, the sewer line, Baxter Road, and then kind of look at the frequency and the vulnerability, and then have them come together. So I'm just going to tell you where this would play out. So the question, the previous question 2 ago, which was about the vulnerability, we had the most answers in the, we had 10, we're sort of mid-range for both of them. So, yeah, so we'd be up in the, so if you take, and then you go up to middle range there, that's where we would kind of position ourselves in that risk matrix based on the answers that you just went through. So that's something that we'll be doing with kind of other parts of the island and other resources and assets going forward. So we're going to do the voting in the back in a moment, which will rejuvenate us because the clickers was a terrible fail.
One question.
Yeah.
The trend over time wasn't brought out in that. I can see, for instance, in terms of the Millie's Bridge, that area, because of what happened this last year, looks more vulnerable. Therefore, it would tend to change over time. So it's almost a three-dimensional matrix.
It is. It's a really good point. Risk is changing over time. It's a great point. I hope that you've all, I think many of you have taken the survey. We've had 100 or so, 150 responses.
Yeah, that's up the last slide.
Okay.
136. I think.
So hearing as a survey is a surprise to nobody. Many of you taking it. Why don't you go ahead and we're going to move into this voting and filling up the cards, which are 2 separate activities. So you'll have the cards, you can give your opinions on those 4 types of options going forward. What we're going to do with the boards in the back is we're going to pass out dots. The color doesn't matter. We like them to be multiple color, like a bag of Skittles, so you can take any color. You're going to go ahead to each of the boards. There's 10 neighborhoods, and we're going to vote for 15 minutes on the side of the boards facing us all, which is risks. There'll be a series of questions. You can vote for 3. Don't start it yet. So the 3 most critical risks, that's what we're going to do. So you're going to take 3 dots. So here's Tom Nevers. You have flood inundation, erosion, windy events, intense precipitation, drought, and increasing temperatures. You're going to vote for 3 of those on each of the boards, each of the neighborhoods. So you can change your answer based on the neighborhood. And what we saw in May was that people did just that. So in the downtown Grand Point board, people chose different risks than in Wisconsin. And that's fine. That's what we want to kind of hear from you all. After 15 minutes, we're going to flip the boards around and look at adaptation options and we'll do the voting again. So I think what we'll do is while the voting is going on, you come to me to get the cards that you don't have yet. So vote, and then come to us to get the cards that you don't have, and we'll all straighten that out. So if no one gives the dots?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, the color isn't going to matter. And just take a sheet, pass it down. Yeah, I'll take those clickers and I'm going to put them in the trash. There are 10. There's 10 neighborhoods. No, well, you can some more, go around with some more.
Yeah.
More than one sheet.
Yeah, you won't need more than
No, you won't.
And it depends on the size of the sheet.
Yep.
We have one.
Actually,
I'm confused,
No, no,
that's all right,
the-
I'll just keep it, it's okay, it's all good.
The colors don't matter. The colors don't matter. And then for those that can still hear me, if you have a specific question or comment or question, there's a pen attached to each board. You can write it on a Post-it note and just post it. On the condition of the vote. They're coming.
Go to low tech. Here, have some dots.
I'll go back.
Some dots and half.
Okay, we'll take back the clickers. Anybody, just give them to me.
Dave has the.
Okay, many neighborhoods. You know, when you have the more stickers,
Yeah.
more stickers, I'll take clickers. Please don't leave, everyone walk into the voting. Everyone take as many sheets as you want, the colors don't matter. We like them to look multicolored. You can't, you can use, yes.
Are we supposed to go to each neighborhood?
More stickers. Any neighborhood of interest. The more the better.
Stickers.
That's all right.
Gotta be right before us, please.
I'll go get some extra stickers over here. Anybody needs?
I'm getting out of the way, I'm getting whacked.
Yeah, come on over here for cards. Junior.
There are also pens on the board, and you can write notes and sticky notes if you have specific notes about specific locations that you want us to go to.
Oh, you need the regular. So choose 3, you're voting for 3. 3 risks in each neighborhood. Do not put all 3 dots in one row.
Ah, come on.
3 risks. Who needs cards? Cards. Anybody not get 4 cards?
No, I didn't get one.
So we have to use 3, or can we just use 2? You can just use 2. Yeah, because the threshold in the that's okay. Does anybody need it? Cards. The card, we want to fill those out too. Because I think the initial few slides is helping to negotiate. And then change.
So the biggest risk in my neighborhood is just Cisco, and it isn't.
Oh, well.
Hence.
And it's not the same as Surfside.
Well, so I should just say about the neighborhoods, these aren't like hard and fast boundaries. But if you have a comment like that, when you go to the, this doesn't work, go to the board in which it appears and write it close to the board. Wait a second.
Cisco is,
It's south?
it's south, it's, sort of, I'll say, just for the sake of argument, it's at the bottom of my,
And it's not in any of these figures?
Wait a second. Okay.
so just
Well, here.
for next time,
You have,
you might want to think about it.
would you,
I'd be happy to write it.
no one first
Yes,
or no one first?
yes.
Yeah, we have the whole island, so I don't know.
All right, I will, I just want to go at very point, because I
Yeah.
haven't done that yet, but
Yeah.
then I'll see why.
Cards, do you have cards? Everyone has cards. Well, there's more voting, we're gonna flip these all over. Has everybody been to each risk board before we flip them around and give adaptation? That's okay.
I can't really. Okay. Yeah, so, yeah, that's,
So
so,
let's do 5 more minutes of risk board.
my literal neighborhood. So, this is the,
To try to help us.
that's the area.
Oh. Yeah, a lot of people. Well, just stay for
So, I'm gonna call this yours. I mean,
Yeah, this is,
well, interestingly, so,
What's it?
so, there's,
I know, I actually saw,
Mark's farm here.
Everybody done with the risk voting? That's okay. Couple more minutes. And then postcards. So grab a pen off the board if you want to write on the post. If you don't have your own pen, you want to write on the postcard. Every board has a pen clipped to you. You can take it right off.
and that, people have not gotten to the Cisco data yet, so.
Yeah.
We'll have new maps to vote on.
People's feelings. Yeah, we're gonna go through at the end and just review what kind of one in each board.
when it's life.
I mean, it's when it's the car, you just don't deal with it, right?
Well, no, it's when you live on an island, you adapt. When you have a choice, you know.
Everybody kind of done with the wrist boards? We would like to turn them over. All right, Noah, you and I are going to start at opposite ends and flip them around.
Okay.
So you're going to vote for this time 2 options per neighborhood. There's 2 favorite options, not 3, 2. And it's on the.
Yeah, whoever's near or
Let's flip it around.
those boards, right? I'm sure.
This one too?
Yeah.
I'm really good. I have not done that, but I'm interested for homework from
All right, you're going to vote 2 options, your 2 favorite adaptation options for each neighborhood. You guys got all these. They're all higher. And then turn around again. Turn around. And if you need more stickers, of course, we have more stickers. On the board. So now we're voting for adaptation approaches that are most appropriate to the neighborhood. And these are the same categories that are on the cards. So if after you vote and you feel comfortable with the 4 categories, we would still like to collect comments on these options.
Remind us again, so protect,
Yeah.
protect is like the barrier.
That's the barrier.
Yeah, you're protecting, you're preventing the hazard from reaching the site.
Right. Accommodate is like involved.
Live with it.
Right, you're able to be there, but the water comes with it. Yeah. You may be talking about red point.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that would be like, accommodate the little road.
And I'll continue to take clickers even though I don't know what to do with them anymore. So if you have one, take a look.
And again, please write notes if you have any specific comments about specific neighborhoods. Right, yes.
Now, would you have any clickers?
Yeah, there's a bunch on the table. Yeah.
Sorry. Here. Are we ever going to figure out what happened?
Okay, here's what I think.
Well, tell me afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. So the question is basically,
Everybody getting to each of the boards for identification options.
And we'll put that back up on the slide at the end.
We should decide that. We'll close it back. Maybe it's. So we're still going to aim to finish at 8, and we're going to leave ourselves about 20 minutes to go through each board. So if everyone's should feel like they have plenty of time, we can keep voting for 5 more minutes. Thank you. Noah, you have an idea about what you thought it was. This gentleman's done this a lot before. Maybe each executive discussion about that. Has everybody voted on the adaptation options? We got a few more voters going on, right? And we'll take last minute clickers. They will not work anywhere else in your life, especially since they didn't work tonight.
Should we?
Yeah, let's go to the boards. Okay. No. All right, so we're going to do a quick report out. Let you guys get out of here. It's been somewhat excruciating. Thank you for stuck with us. Yeah, it was great. No, I'm going to start while you're clicking just to keep it moving.
Yeah.
We're not going to go in any particular order, neighborhood. So we will start with, but I don't want to start with, I don't want to start there. Okay. Start with Nantucket. All right, so on the risk side, wow. Okay, so flood and inundation and erosion have the highest number of votes, closely followed by wind events, and then 2 people said intense precipitation, which does make some sense. There are some paved roads and people in close proximity to one another. But then drought and increasing temperature was not something that was seen as important as flood inundation, erosion, and wind events. We don't have any specific comments on the post-it notes, which is fine. For the adaptation options for this area, we have a lot of votes for accommodate and accommodate followed by retreat. So people recognizing that at some point in the future, accommodation may not completely work out. There might be a point in time like with the Stilt House, which was in this area, at least it was in this view on this board. The accommodation worked for a long time, and then eventually that wasn't an option that was viable anymore. We do have a few people that voted for protect and a few people that voted for retreat as kind of the two absolutes. So I think what we learned here is there's greater interest in some sort of combination of accommodation and retreat than absolute retreat or absolute protect, although those were votes that were in there.
One comment is that you may find one or two structures in there that are worth protecting.
That's right, that's right.
And
You can't, I mean,
It's hard to generalize.
it is hard to. And that's what we've asked people to generalize, and they know that's difficult to do. I mean, if you've got infrastructure that needs to be protected, that's just one part of this map. It's not the whole area. So we do get that. Noah, why don't you do one?
Okay, so for the Wawanet Great Point area, top hazards, flood inundation, erosion, and high wind as the main concerns that people were worried about. And then it's looking like it's leading towards accommodation followed by retreat, and retreat as the top approaches for adaptation. And we call the neighborhood Great Point, but this whole section is kind of within there, so it's not totally clear. Maybe some people were referring to anything on up here that they would retreat from, but that's what we have for
That's
this.
also an area that sort of happened, from a few areas that's happening here.
That retreat is happening.
No, that we have been doing this for a long time, like, in terms of you do this, and you do that. It's something that's
Yeah. So the discussion about
it's not
retreat
like
versus
something that we
protection.
can do that we really have to do with.
Yeah.
And it's also doesn't have
Doesn't have what?
a lot of people.
A lot of people.
You do both sides?
Yes.
Okay. I'll stick with this southern part of the town. Here's Surfside. So we've got the wastewater treatment lagoons, for example, in this area, but the airport is on a separate sheet. So erosion and wind events and flood inundation kind of were the top three, similar to when we went through Nantucket. Intense precipitation got a few more votes here as compared to Nantucket. And then we had one dot for increasing temperature. That's the risk side. The adaptation option side, the winner was kind of accommodate here, and then also after that, protection and accommodate followed by retreat. Only a few votes for retreat. This is one where someone offered a specific comment. Public infrastructure, sewer beds need to protect if possible, which is a great comment. So I'm glad to see that come out. It means people really looked at this map. So that's good news. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Downtown area. Inundation and intense precipitation are highlighted as the most significant risks, but also people are concerned about erosion and wind events, and also increasing temperatures. There are no comments here for the adaptation approaches. We did get a vote for retreat, but a lot of protect and accommodate, which makes sense. Very densely developed area, not really a lot of relocation options. It's a place where
I didn't realize we had a sticker format. I think maybe in the future you should consider town separate from the whole Grand Point. There are very distinct differences
That's a good
in
point.
their issues. One's the summer, one's the round, one's the so there's, and there's, way more buildings, more people than
It's a fair point. Both sides? Okay. Southern part of the harbor, kind of east of downtown. Risks, flood inundation probably has the most votes, followed closely by erosion, then wind events. Intense precipitation got a couple of votes, but it's certainly not as densely developed, so we wouldn't expect to see as many people worried about that intense precipitation. We don't have any specific comments in the post-it notes. In terms of adaptation options, this one, interestingly, so accommodation followed by retreat was, I think, had the most votes. Protect also had maybe more than I would have expected for this area. I don't typically think of this area as having a lot of existing protection right now, so maybe I'm completely wrong about that. I need to get myself out there and look around, but that was an option that came up as number 2. But really all 4 categories had votes in this case. And that probably speaks to the diversity of the area.
My guess is that I don't think people are considering property values as something to be protected. In other words, some of these properties along there are extremely valuable.
So you think they're
Just because of real estate prices that have been sold. Now, I question whether that's something I worry about, but that's something that somebody may worry, certainly worries about.
Next.
So Tom Nevers area, and kind of Tom Nevers and west. Erosion is a big concern there, as well as wind events. Those are really the top 2. Inundation is also some stickers for that. And for adaptation approaches, kind of accommodate followed by treat leaning votes.
Okay. The Moors, and this is a sort of a very lightly developed. Oh,
Yeah, this was the Cisco was highlighted as the main.
okay.
That's why this came out.
Oh, okay. So, wind events kind of got a big money share of the votes. What's that? Erosion. Yeah, erosion.
See the yellow dots.
Erosion didn't get as many, but I think, so this board is sort of more oriented towards, well,
Some people also
Yeah,
this is
it came out
one-
later.
right. Well, right, this was one of our extras that we pulled out when Cisco came up, right?
Yeah, on the erosion.
So maybe we didn't get complete voting here, so I will make a note of that.
It's also differentiate between on the water, really
Yeah.
on the water versus.
And these, you know,
Differences in some areas.
yeah, and that's a little bit by design. We're trying to avoid the severe neighborhood boundaries a little bit in this planning process. I think we'll get into that when we need to, but we kind of want to just get a general sense for what the problems are in the area. Go ahead with the next.
That was an airport. Can I do airport?
I don't think you did it yet.
All right, so for the airport, we have wind events are the strong signal as that's a concern, and then erosion, intense precipitation, and flood inundation, kind of everything across the board. And then for adaptation options, protect and accommodate, which makes sense for kind of critical infrastructure like the airport.
I cheated and went through the whole stack because I wanted Wisconsin. Left you with. Okay, so risks in the Wisconsin area. A lot of wind event risk noted, which is appropriate for its location, but erosion as well. Flood inundation I'm a little bit surprised about. I'm wondering if people are thinking about Codfish Park or drainage-related flooding, or both maybe. Because certainly up on the bluff, that's not as much of a concern, but a lot of votes for flooding, so we need to look into that a little bit. And then intense precipitation, it does make sense to have a few votes for that because in the more densely developed areas, there's a lot of pavement, that sort of thing.
Codfish Park. stream of kind of, either it's flooded or it's not there. So,
With regard to precipitation, isn't there erosion happening at the top of the bluff because of runoff?
That's a component of it as well. So people could be thinking about that in addition to sort of on the screen. For approaches, there's one comment, public infrastructure important to protect. So that was written in a posted note. And then we have kind of a good spread between all four options. So I won't belabor that. You can see every one of the four got a few votes.
Okay, so the Wawinet neighborhood, so I thought that the other map that I looked at was Wawinet, I misspoke. So for here, we have flood inundation, erosion, and wind events, fairly even spread between those three. And then for the adaptation, accommodation followed by retreat and retreat. Seems very similar to the rate point, maybe, I forget what the title of that other slide was, but similar responses.
And then once you go and do the last
Okay.
one.
And then the Dionysus, the North Shore area here, side. Erosion, wind events, and flood inundation are pointed out for this area. And then our adaptation approaches, accommodate followed by retreat. A lot of votes all across the board. So, yeah.
So the last thing to do is to fill out your comment cards. And so the way that these work is, and if you maybe you've already filled them out, some people already turned them to us and then had to leave early, but there's four categories: accommodation followed by retreat, and protect. There's a photo on the front which kind of is a good example, not the best example perhaps, but it's one that we had handy, a local example. For example, the accommodation card has two houses in Grant Point that have been elevated. And the retreat card, I think, has a picture of Codfish Park, one of the vacant, previously occupied lots from a while ago. The protection card, I think, gives a picture of the information sign, Sconset. And the accommodation followed by retreat is the Sills House, I believe. Go ahead.
I guess I'm a little perplexed. We're being sort of geocentric, looking at neighborhoods.
Yes.
We're talking about how we feel about those neighborhoods.
Yep.
My question is there a plan already in place to take care of the infrastructure, which I think individual neighborhoods are meaningless if you don't have sewers, you don't have electricity, you don't have an airport, and you don't have a way on and off.
Yeah.
So it would seem to me that even before we attack neighborhoods, that global look at infrastructure
Yeah.
is the most important thing we do.
Yeah.
The rest of it just seems like, well, I live in Nantucket, but I want more protection, or I live in Wisconsin, and I want more protection.
Yeah.
So I'm asking the question is, have we begun to look at protecting the infrastructure already, and this is just another phase?
Yes and no. So your comment is well made. It's taken. It's a great point. There are many people who say it's all about the property. Maybe they're not saying that right now. So just hear me out. So what we're trying to do is kind of do both. We're trying to just show you a view. In this view, there's property, there's infrastructure. The property needs the infrastructure, but right now, to get through this initial part of the planning, we're kind of just trying to address it spatially. We know that this sewer is very important in Wisconsin and downtown, but not in, I don't know.
It's just homeless.
Just right. People are on septic. So we do need to look at that, and that's important. And then the sewer beds happen to be on a board, but they're serving an area that might be on another board. We get that. So it's a little bit more complex than what we're trying to do right now. So we're trying to keep it really simple today, and doesn't always.
Your property could be worth $25 million, but if you don't have electricity,
Yeah.
you don't have sewer and water,
Yeah.
it ain't worth $25 million. It's that simple.
Yeah. Or if steamship is down for a month, or if the fuel facility is gone, right? That's a great point.
No, I
It
mean,
is.
to me, there seems to be some self-interest in looking at property I mean, I obviously have property I'd like for it to be valuable too, but I'm more concerned about whether or not I can come back after an event and be able to use my house.
Yeah,
You know, if there's no electricity for 2 months,
exactly. Yeah.
my house is gonna be worthless.
Yeah, if we end up
So-
being like Puerto Rico.
Right, so we will look at all of that. That's
Right.
squarely falls into our scope. That is not being missed.
Okay.
But there's a difficult way to do that at this kind of session, unless you have one that's just about infrastructure, unless you come back and talk about only infrastructure, that would be, I think, a different kind of meeting. That's not necessarily a bad idea. Now, the MVP process, which is about to take off, which is, it's not public driven, but it's stakeholder driven. But I really imagine many of you will be involved as by virtue of whoever you are, wherever you live, a neighborhood organization, or if you're in some other conservation league or something, you may be involved in the MVP process. That does have an 8-hour workshop or 2 4-hour workshops. And during that time, you're going to be able to look at, we're going to be able to look at, if we're working with the town, each of those things on its own. So it's kind of a different, there's just, we have 2 hours tonight, we don't have 8. So,
I'm just looking at a global approach.
yeah.
It's great to think locally, but, I mean, the other way around.
Right. So if you can, go ahead, any questions?
Can you explain what we're putting in the cards?
Yes, so getting back to the cards. So the cards are, they don't have a spatial component. You don't have to think about them as town-wide if you don't want to. You could turn it over, and there's a prompt for each of the 4 categories about erosion and about flooding. So if you're on the erosion card, it's going to ask you, if you're on the protection card, it's going to ask you what your thoughts are on protecting from flooding. So that's like a wall, so the water doesn't reach you. Or if it's erosion, that's tow protection or a seawall or a bulkhead. So there's, again, 2 prompts in the back of each card, one about flooding, one about erosion. So look at what the category is, if it's accommodation.
You're looking for needs? What?
We're just looking for your thoughts, any thoughts. I hate this sucks, I don't want to see this anywhere. Or I love this should be used everywhere in downtown. You can write whatever you want in the comment card. You can say, this works in Sconset, it'll never work in Cisco. You could write, this is great for Grant Point, but it's not going to work in Nantucket. That's what we want to hear. Or we don't want to see this anywhere. Or you could write on the back of it, this is important for infrastructure, but not for property. This is your chance to say whatever you want that you haven't already said with a dot or with a clicker that didn't work. So this is kind of like, this isn't your last chance, period, forever. We're going to hear from you again, but in this 2 hours, I think we're coming close to, yeah, we got 6 minutes. That's okay. We're on the 8, or sorry, the 9:20 vote, so you can stay. So this is your chance. If you didn't have a chance to say it, if you want to say it differently, if you want it to be about property, if you want it to be about infrastructure, it goes on this card. And
Also, if it doesn't quite fit into the category, you can write things and we'll figure it out. Anyone just hit a pen?
You need the cards. We have a pen. Thank you all for people who are still here. I know it's hard to be here at 8 o'clock on July 18th, when you could be somewhere else. Anyone else need cards or pens? You need which? I'm sorry, when I was that direction.
While you're writing things down and have pens, I'm just going to also leave this up. So if you want to write down the address of the online poll, you can do that.
So I think I don't need to beat a dead horse, but any kind of comment you have can go in the card. No implication of one location. We're not promoting anything, just your thoughts.
No, if we haven't filled out the public survey, can you go back to it? Is it closed? Or?
It's not, this is open. You can go fill it out. Yeah.
Yes. And so Holly brought up a really good point a few minutes ago, which was we should talk about when the survey will be closed. Where's the cards? There they are. And so because it's been open since April and we have about 136 responses, we do want to leave it open a little bit longer, but we also want to have it sort of closed up so we can kind of move on in the planning process. And so raise your hand if you haven't taken it yet. Okay. So what do you guys think? 2 more weeks? Maybe
So I would say we're probably thinking about 30 days, but
Okay.
we will post a date up there,
Right.
well in advance, and we'll kind of circulate that.
But you didn't have a chance to say, but everyone, I hope by now knows that there's a whole page on the town's website devoted to this. And if you haven't been there, I would encourage you to go check it out. There's a lot of resources on the page.
So have you reached out through the Nantucket Civic League to have neighborhood association presidents reach out to their groups? I think you would get a huge response.
That is going to be happening as part of the MVP process on this website.
But is that going to be happening next time?
No.
Because like, for instance, Great Point Association.
Okay.
I just want to know what the other areas are doing in the next couple of weeks.
So I guess your point is more that you feel like it's a good chance to.
Maybe just
To get people to
contact
know
them,
about the-
Specifically contact.
Well, if you
them.
contact,
Yeah.
specifically tomorrow, they'll,
We have them.
Yeah, we've reached out.
okay.
To
so-
tell them about the survey, is what you're saying?
Yeah, well, then I must have not, because my neighborhood is pretty local. If, you know, all they need to do is get asked to do something and they're shutting on the spot, so I will, get on that.
Everybody, my sincerest apology on the Clippers. We're gonna try to figure out what happened. It was the most fun thing about the May meeting. It was way more fun than the dots. And without it working, we had to make the dots fun and we did. So, thank you for bearing with us. We will solve the problem. It doesn't happen again. In exchange for that, you should take 2 cookies.
Oh, yeah.
We do have, did we go through this?
No.
So we wanted to also just give you a glimpse of what we heard from people in the main meeting. I can tell you it hasn't been significantly different than what we heard tonight. But, and we didn't want to tell you this earlier on because we wanted you to have a pure experience tonight. But the words are there. Some more frequent flooding, accelerated erosion were things that were observed. Maybe more frequent severe wind and precipitation events. The most urgent challenge, remember that slide of the most urgent, was more frequent intense storms and erosion. Primary challenge, which one do you see there? Infrastructure, great answer. And then for the approaches to building resilience, some combination of retreat, accommodate, protect. And then in the mapping activity, which was the voting on the dots. Inundation and erosion were the primary concerns. I'm right in Libby's way, I apologize. Wind came up in some areas, intense precipitation. Clearly in that meeting, Sconset and downtown was where we saw most of those votes. And then retreat was acceptable to many attendees. So that's what we kind of heard in the month of May. I thought it'd be good just to share that with you. Yep.
How much have you discussed what is being used in Holland? And they've been doing this for years, and for centuries. So, and have even experimented with floating cities,
Yeah.
because that's where we're going here. You can only build so many dikes.
Yeah, I mean, Holland is kind of, they've perfected protection, right? But
They
they've
have.
also kind of perfected accommodation. They have not perfected retreat, they're not interested in retreat, too small.
Right.
So looking at what they're doing is a part of this.
Okay.
But if you're going to do what Holland has done, and to some extent what New Orleans has done, you have to have a redundant, extremely reliable electric system, right, to ensure that your pumps will remain viable. I mean, in World War II, the Germans came in and turned off the electricity and defeated Holland in a couple of days.
And
We saw it happen in Katrina. It was an electrical problem. So, it's a great idea, except
it's not gonna work island-wide. It's gonna be something that you consider where you have the density that will make it cost-effective, right? You're not gonna try to do it, probably not in Nantucket. Something to look at.
protect the sewer beds
Like sewer beds or point.
downtown.
You need to have we haven't even talked about it, but you know, to get money these days from the feds, you have to show that the benefits outweigh the costs. So you need to have enough people, the infrastructure needs to be in place to justify it.
I think you also need to look at the, where you're good. When you talk about the $25 million home that sits on the water, the property, and they protect their property from the neighbors, because they're, they put a barrier,
Yeah.
and the adjoining properties now get the money. So that is a whole, that's the, I'm protecting myself
Right, you want to look at,
versus, and that's,
you want to look at what works for more than one
right,
property.
and a lot of our, I think a lot of our regulations are more focused on the people that have been pumping out underneath their houses, and they're pumping onto the road or the neighbor.
Well, a lot of-
That's the part that
Yeah.
you gotta get people to buy into.
Well, you mentioned regulations, and a lot of the regulations that we have require us to look at the application in front of us. That's every town in this country, right? The application in front of you. So you need to sometimes have a broader perspective. But it's not just that, it's also, if there is an effect to that one property, how do we offset if there's a loss of tax base? I mean, I'm trying to delete a parcel in Wellford. I can't get the parcel deleted. It's not there anymore, it's submerged, and the town's like, well, I don't really know what's going on in the assessor database. How do we solve that problem? Right, doesn't sound like a big problem, but of course the town's looking at the parcel. So these are all things that we think about.
I think that's one of those, no one ever anticipated that an entire parcel could go away.
Right. But that's happening.
Yeah, of course.
It's happening,
White
it's
House.
happening in Nantucket.
Yeah.
There's part, if you look at
Absolutely.
the parcel mapping, Holly's seen the parcel mapping, there's parcels that are submerged. So
Yeah.
people doing okay with the cards, so anything you want to write. That guy's suit's terrible.
I